Well, we do have a panel. There has been a thread of themes going through this conference, and one of which is education. You heard it this morning from Liz. You've heard it this afternoon. And talking about education and technology and learning technologies is an important area in which we want to focus. So we have an amazing panel here. I'm going to allow Sue Swenson to introduce them, but Sue Swenson is the Acting Assistant Secretary of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, OSERS, U.S. Department of Education. I always want to make sure I get it right, so I have it all there. Sue has really been with the Coleman Institute since the beginning, pretty close since the beginning, and we keep inviting her back because she's amazing and really understands the concepts and what the Coleman's vision was for the Institute. So thank you, Sue, for coming back.
I wish I could say I really did understand that much. I keep sort of floating in here and then floating back out again. Thanks so much for reminding us about the soul and its importance in the center of what we do. I really appreciate that. I think the Colemans have been working in that space for a very long time and trying to make technology help us understand what's human. I am sorry that I got introduced because I had already agreed with my panel that we were just first names. So I'm Sue, this is Yuta, Vic, Mark, and Tracy. Our bios are in here. They all know way more than I do. I want to ask a question though to start. Raise your hand if you went to school. So you're an expert on education, right? Raise your hand if you loved school. Keep it up if school did every single thing for you, met every single need. Yeah, kind of hard to get to that point. I got one hand up in the whole room. I want to talk to you afterwards. We agreed that we wanted our panel to be as provocative as possible because everyone has this universal experience of education. We wanted to try to get us out of thinking of how technology is delivered to students with disabilities under various laws and programs. So our first topic that we wanted to address is how will technology and the inclusion of learners with disabilities in school and throughout life, how is that going to change education in a fundamental way? What's going to shift? So this is the paradox. So we're not talking about how we can deliver something called education to children with disabilities. We're talking about how children with disabilities are going to change what education really is.
Can I
Please.
start? Okay. So I think the promise of technology is not necessarily the new features and functions. Is my mic working? I'm hearing lots of. Oh.
You'll have to be tethered to me for a minute.
Okay. So the promise of technology is not really the functions and features, but the opportunity, I think, for disruption and the opportunity to rethink the way that we do things. And that's certainly happening in education, although education is fairly change resistant and has lots of ways to prevent change. But if you are someone that's not served by a current system, then the technology opening that space to rethink how we do things. One of the things that I think is happening in the disability space is that we are rethinking within education what, not just the path and pace of learning, but also what is the destination of learning. Technology has made it possible to no longer have sort of the industrial model of creating a whole bunch of graduates who all have the same skills and can all do the same things, all have the same competencies, and go through specific steps to reach that. And what that opens up is this notion that we all can contribute something diverse. And so can we create an education system that allows us to determine what we're best at, move towards what we're best at? Because I think one of the other things that this disruption has allowed us to think about is just the value of diversity. In education, we're constantly thinking diversity is an issue, but it's not an issue. It's our biggest strength. and how we're going to survive as a civilization and overcome all of these massive challenges that we're encountering is by taking advantage of that diversity. So by virtue, I mean, what's the biggest defining characteristic of people with disabilities? What's the common element? The common element is difference, right? It's difference from average, it's difference from the statistical norm of the students that are within the class. So we have the impetus to try to create inclusion and accessibility, to value that difference, to offer the opportunity to be different to every student, and thereby make it a welcoming place and an inclusive place for all of the children and students that we work with that have a difference.
Anybody else?
I just want to add on to what it is that you're saying, in the sense that every classroom, every room that we fill as humans has huge variability. There is no one size fits all. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, whether we have technology or not have technology. But I think that the technology that we can bring into these settings is a way in which we can help to meet the needs of all learners, regardless of ability or disability or what the variability is that you bring into that space. And that the technology has such great flexibility that we can help meet needs in ways in which we haven't been able to before, in the way that these tools are available to us.
Yeah, I agree. I think technology, it's no secret that we all prefer to learn in different ways. We all learn in different ways. And the old model where a teacher stands in front of a room and talks and refers to information, research information in a print format is changing, and we now have technology will allow us to. We talked earlier about crowdsourcing, where the students can actually contribute user and learner contributed content. They can interpret and filter the way that the information was originally shared, add their own take on it, and hopefully somebody else would benefit from that information.
And I'll just add, I guess, I mean, at a very high level, I mean, what is powerful is that the notion of personalization and personalized learning is really starting to happen in K-12, at least from the mindset shift. And you're seeing through Zuckerberg and all these others that are starting to jump in and realize that, which has been happening in the field of disabilities and learning differences for decades. And so I think that that's really, there's a lot to learn and kind of pull from that. And what's exciting is, you know, shifting mindset is often some of the hardest part, but now we have to make sure it's done well and for all learners and at a high quality and in ways that empower learners. And so I think, you know, the good news is I think it's shifting to where we're getting winds at our back to really move in this direction. But we have to make sure that the systems and the way we do things really supports that all really does mean all, and that it really transforms how we approach this.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think the key that you're bringing up is the opportunity to connect classrooms, to connect students, to connect teachers, to take down those divisions and silos. I would say, I mean, since we're talking radically, I would say we need to rethink even the notion of grades. I mean, these age-linked stages that we all have to go through, all the difficulty that happens when students don't fit into those grades. I'm sure it's not just kids with disabilities that don't fit into grades. Degrees, that there's a terminal degree within a profession. Learning is lifelong. Why are we causing people to go through a set of stages that is predetermined? You can come at knowledge sideways and upside down. You can progress through something in a very different path. So it's not, I mean, all of these things I think we need to rethink, not just for the individuals who are at the edge, as was said earlier, but for every student. And the divisions that we create in terms of disciplinary silos, in terms of topics, the disparate value we give to science versus art, all of those have to do with the types of borders that we create. So let's rethink it, because I think that will support diversity better, support our difference, our variability.
So one of the problems we face in the Department of Education is there's children in the United States who have great teachers and great schools, and then there's children who have not so great teachers, maybe brand new teachers or untrained teachers, and very differently funded schools. Schools that don't reach the kind of funding that we see everywhere. And you know, our schools are funded on property taxes, local property taxes. So as much variation as there is in American communities, that's the variation in schools. When we add a second layer in there of technology, how can we support in this kind of patchwork of funding and capability, how can we support equal access to technology for all children, or is that important? Is it okay if rich kids in rich schools get really good technology and other kids in other schools get a used iPad and a teacher who doesn't know one app from another app? How are we going to bridge that? I guess that's the real learning challenge. It's the adult learning piece more than it is the kid learning piece. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll pick that up because at Digital Promise we work on that quite a bit, I think. And there's kind of two base layers. One is in terms of connectivity and just kind of basic infrastructure. And I think
What the chairman was talking about this morning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's important. Federal government, as well as there's some great nonprofits that have made significant progress, but there's still more work to be done and push that. But then there is this notion in the National Education Technology Plan of the digital use divide, where we want to be careful that it's not just in lower income neighborhoods, kids sitting for 2 hours in front of a thing clicking multiple choice questions. And in the wealthy, neighborhoods, they're making apps, they're starting businesses, they're doing Maker, it's very empowering and rich. They have choice and they can go. And so really, we're spending a lot of time diving into that, and I think it's a challenge. But lots of opportunities, and there are kind of examples coming out, and we have kind of our League of Innovative Schools, which is 85 districts now, trying to get superintendents to share kind of communities of practice. That connectivity across the profession, I think, is how some of that can start to spread in a kind of low-cost, scalable way, where teachers are supporting teachers. And we partnered with the department around the Maker Promise initiative to create a whole network for that. And so networks is one of the powerful ways to really build.
What about networks in UDL? Do you think that's making a difference?
I do, I really do. But I wanted to pick up what Vic was saying in the sense that this dichotomy that in the sense we have as adults, I think oftentimes we look at children in the restaurant or in the backseat of a car or whatever, and they're on their devices, and we resent that. It's like we have too much of this, and that's too much of this digital time. And it's not just digital time, it's the quality of that digital time. And I think that's something that we all need to kind of be aware of. And you really brought that out nicely. I think that's great. Networking, yeah, is critically important. I mean, I live in the world of universal design for learning, and we definitely know that there's a great power behind the ability to have connectivity and be able to interact and work within the networks that are available to us. And I think that we can help to level some of those playing fields. Certainly the hardware needs to be out there, but it was said earlier today, we need the hardware, we need the software, and we need the good pedagogy to make those things work together.
Wetware.
There you go. There you go.
I think the key words were, equity and access. I think funding the production of free learning materials, I think, is super important. One of the favorite parts of my work week is every week at our all hands meeting we have a learner story that usually comes in through our support channel, where somebody writes in from somewhere and thanks us for the access that we've given them to quality educational materials. And the majority of them are from, and we do not target high school kids. The majority of our material is aimed at higher education. And most of them are from high school kids who are thanking us, saying that their high school doesn't offer this challenging material and how much it's helped them prepare for college or advance in college. And we also hear a lot from people outside the United States who also have no access to quality education. and are thinking. I'm talking the vast majority of these learner success stories come in through this channel and have the same story where they're thanking us for the free access to quality materials.
So I think we need to move beyond access too. I think that that's really the cornerstone of it is getting the access, but we need to know how to actually make that work. And there are centers, national centers that are helping us with that to learn more. The accessibility, instructional accessibility centers that we have, the NIMAC, the NIMAS, those are all centers and ways in which we can get access to those materials to help not only get access to print materials, but now digital materials at the accessible instructional medias areas, and for technical assistance. And we have like 5 to 8 states now that are really becoming great models for ways in which we can get technical assistance to help not only get the access to, but make the use of. And I think that those are ways in which we're really strengthening what it is that we know about technology, and not just having those 2 initial pieces of the hardware and the software, but the how-tos. And for those of us that maybe had that concern about kids having too much tech time, really making use of that tech time for educational purposes.
Yeah, the technology needs to fit good pedagogy. I think the pedagogy and the teaching, the learning activity needs to precede. I've seen lots of horrible situations where technology has been sort of dropped into a classroom without a real understanding of how it's going to be used or why it's going to be used, and not appropriate for the particular activities there. So we need technology to respond to the requirements of each of the kids within the classroom. And it also, one really bad example of technology is we have a wonderful assistive technology program which funds it for every child that requires it within a class, but it's done homogeneously. Everybody gets the same thing. So if you have a learning disability, you're going to get a screen reader, there's 5 lists of equipment that you have, which doesn't serve well either. There you have access and you have equitable payment, but it's not done in such a way that it actually works for the students that are getting it.
You know, that brings up a really interesting point from the regulatory side. We in the Department of Education talk all the time about we want to use evidence-based interventions for children with disabilities. And sometimes this is interpreted in schools that you need a randomized control trial to prove that some technology works for all children before you can use it for one child. How are we going to get around that?
Yes.
Or under it, or through it, or...
So this is my bugbear at the moment, because of course we have this golden bar of statistical significance. And if you remember a few sentences ago, I said the one defining factor of people with disabilities is difference. And so if you think of the human population as a scatter plot, as you get closer to the outliers, you are more different than the people beside. The likelihood that you're going to find a whole bunch of people that share all of your requirements become less and less than if you're in the middle of that. And so we have a systemic issue here, because the people that we are working with are never going to reach those thresholds of impact, because you can't find enough people that are representative of the people that you're trying to serve. And so you're not going to be able to come up with conclusive evidence that a particular thing that a child with a disability might require. And then that, and it goes through the whole system. Because you can't have, because you're not showing statistical significance, your study is not deemed sufficiently rigorous, it's not high impact, it won't be published, you won't get tenure, you won't be promoted, and the department will not be named for you. But I mean, that's just, so it goes, but it is, it's systemically biased against the individuals that we're working with. And the really, really tragic thing with technology is big data and these evidence-based governance and all of this power tools of government decision-making are amplifying that issue. Because what we're translating, or we're taking from regular research, those same biases to big data, but we're just making it even bigger. So now we need millions of individuals that will benefit from a particular feature before we'll pay it. Well, none of the things that we really need are ever going to pass that threshold. And so does that then mean we are not showing evidence, we're not showing impact, and therefore we're not going to get funded? So there's a solution to that, and that is to think about small data, think about bottom up rather than top down. The other part of traditional research is, as a researcher, and how many of you here are researchers or academics and have done some research? Usually you decide upon, what's the question you're going to ask, what are the characteristics of the people that you're going to study, and then what are the things, the conditions that you're going to control for. And you're imposing that. You've already got something in mind. But the nice thing about data analytics and big data and the new technologies is you can let that bubble up from bottom up. So you can use small data. You all are collecting data at the moment. You have tools for research in your pocket. There's so much that you're learning about yourself, and you can use that to make declarations. And then rather than imposing something, we can say, oh, look at these emerging patterns. And these actually do tell us something about our kids that doesn't require them to be the same as hundreds and thousands of other individuals. And we can start to identify gaps where we're not serving, and the kids that we're not actually, whose needs we're not addressing.
So to build on that, amen. This is what we've been working on a lot. And it's really hard. And it is just, at the simplest level, what's funny is if you look at the research, what we know is that learners learn differently, and it varies by context. And yet all of our research tries to find one solution to work for all learners in all contexts. And it's kind of ironic. And the sad part is, imagine you have a randomized control trial, 2,000 kids. Maybe this thing works really well for 50 kids,
Right.
but not as much for the rest. The effect size is minimal, it gets thrown out. Those 50 kids lose a solution that works perfectly for them. And it's shifting this mindset from one solution for all to many solutions for many kids. And we have to start understanding how to support and scaffold that kind of matching and that structure in the way we go about it. We just published also, just some ways to emphasize this, a paper just on diversity in the K-12 population and how that's increased, and even just taking some broad overgeneralized categories. If you take English language learners, deep poverty, learning differences, trauma, you're talking now almost 40% of kids, and even over that. It's so big that it's just impossible to think that we're going to find these silver bullet solutions continuously, and we have to embrace the diversity if we're going to really do this at a systemic level rather than try and standardize or normalize it out. So,
And it's not just the diversity, but also the complexity. The other really silly thing with research is we say we can isolate the conditions. We can determine that it's this factor that is causing this. Well, believe me, everybody's life is complex. Whose life here is not complex? Who can isolate exactly the factors that are determining certain things? So we need to find tools, research tools, that'll help us navigate the complexity, not try to reduce it or ignore it, which is even more dangerous.
Mark?
Yeah, it just sounds to me like we need to use big data to find the outliers in work, as you were saying, from the outside in. Find a solution that is optimized for the outliers and identify the parts of the solution that also apply to the greater population. In web development, we have this concept called mobile first, where you design your UX for the hardest problem to achieve, which is the mobile platform, and then you scale it outwards, which is easy. When you try to do it the opposite direction.
And that also works well for testing. People with disabilities are the greatest litmus test for really failed design. And they're also the first that are going to detect something that is a really bad design. So it's great for being innovative in design, and it's also great for detecting ways in which you've done something bad or that is not going to work for people.
And one thing that's really interesting about a lot of the supports and scaffolds that we build into tools for students is that we may have them in mind for particular disabilities, for example, not being able to decode text, right? But we found that over and over again, that capability or that feature or function is very useful for people who do have reading skills. Still make good use of it. And that's true across so many things that we've done. Think of closed captioning, lots of the kinds of the features that we have that were really designed initially for a small population, but the larger population has found many good and valuable uses for it. I mean, you look at the cart that we have up here, that's really for a few people that may be here, but look at how many of us have been making use of that today. So there really are multiple uses of these kinds of things, and we need to not just restrict how it is that we do the analyses and how we make the decisions. We can do more than the 50 kids that it was valuable for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's often the real challenge that we have with the way in which a lot of our gold bars or standards are set.
So I've wondered about that coming from the disability community, and all of our laws, you know, they start with the principle that disability is a natural part of the human experience, but then even the ADA defines what a disability is before you have the right to ask for a reasonable accommodation. And IDEA, you have to fit into these categories before you're allowed to ask for this or this. I think a lot of the stuff we're developing as learning tools for kids with disabilities are going to be usable by everybody.
Yeah.
So that just means we're going to be constantly torquing up the achievement, and the kid with a disability might always be a little bit behind. Do you think that's right, that they'll always be a little bit behind? Or, I mean, if listening to books works so well for children with disabilities right now, under international treaties, under Marrakesh, we're not allowed to give Bookshare to anybody who asks for it. You have to have
a
visual disability, a physical disability that means you can't turn a page, or dyslexia to be able to use that service. What if we opened it up and everybody could use it? Then what would happen?
That's a question we're always asking at CAST. I mean, completely. Why limit those methods by which we can access materials, right? And there are multiple ways out there. Why do we have to limit it to students with disabilities or a particular characteristic? Why do we have to fail for so long in what it is that we do before we have the opportunity to get access to those things? That's frustrating, yeah.
And having, in my previous work, I was at the Hewlett Foundation leading up the open educational resources work, and I mean, there was case after case. When you put things out openly, it gets used by so many more people that it wasn't directly designed for in such powerful ways. And we found innovation in that way. Then you start going in that direction and say, hey, there's a lot more here.
But you were alluding to if it's made available to everyone, then individuals with disabilities are not going to be able to catch up. But I think one thing we need to change in education is this emphasis on competition, on a race towards the same goal, and that it's in fact a race. Because I think that just even the notion of cheating, I mean, if you think of it, we need cheaters out there in the workplace and everywhere. Not cheaters in the sense that we talk about it morally, but if cheating with an education is simply looking up things and asking your peers and collaboratively learning something, then that's exactly what we need in the workplace. But we've seemed to have created this environment where it is a race to the same goal, which that's not what we need in our society at the moment. We need collaborators, we need people with different skills, we need people going to different places and achieving different skills and competencies. So I think that fear that if we allow these assistive technologies or these special features which you have to now certify that you have a disability to qualify for, are made available to everyone, that individuals with disabilities will be disadvantaged again. I don't think that's a fear that we should worry about. I think we need to rethink where that question even comes from and look at competition versus collaboration, help peer-to-peer support, collaborative learning, helping everybody working as a team. I mean, if we are thinking about competition, if we're thinking about these little duplicate clones, then the team model goes away. We each have very, very specific strengths, and we can foster teams within an education system.
Mark, you look like you're thinking about something.
I actually went off on a tangent in my own head.
Good,
Sorry.
go there.
I don't even know if I could tie it back to what Yuta was saying, so.
Okay. Well, I think this notion of what's fair and what's not fair has its roots in disability as a charity model. And I think when we in the disability world try to think past that, we will begin to think that if we're developing tools for us, we should certainly want them to be usable by everyone else. We have a great deal of work to do in intellectual property law to make that happen.
Yeah, and
I think.
it's about fulfilling individual potential, you know?
Yeah.
It's really for everybody, you know, as much as just everyone just staying in competition.
And cheating is still a thing. You know, we have states that allow kids to use whatever accommodations they want to use and technologies in learning environments. They just can't use them to take their tests that they need to take to graduate from high school. So you can have dyslexia and use tools in school, but you can't use the tool on the exam because that would be cheating. This drives me crazy.
Yeah, you're not alone. That's just so...
Because what are we telling that student? And it's, I mean, I told the state person I was talking to, you know, Stephen Hawking, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, you know all those tools that he uses? And he said, yeah. And I said, you know, you could give me every single one of those tools and I would not be a world-class physicist. So giving people accommodations is in no way a step up into, you know, better performance. It is as compared to how they can perform if you tie their arms behind their back. But I don't know how we change that in regulations. That's something, that's mindset, that's culture. It's getting people to understand how does disability really work in life. I don't know how close we are to that. I opened up a hackathon at the White House one day, and I was, as usual, flying by the seat of my pants. So I said, we need a regulatory hackathon. We need to bring people in and look at all of the regulations that impact education and technology, and we need to start writing in the moment, what do we need to do differently with these regs? FERPA, it's in the way. You know, it's there for a reason to protect privacy, but it really does impede our being able to deliver the right thing to the right person at the right time, which I think is the goal. But I don't know who would be in the room for a regulatory hackathon, because I don't know enough about tech. I guess you'd have to have a mix of people.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a mix. Definitely a mix.
A team.
That would be a diverse team.
So Mark, where was your tangent? What question do you want to ask us?
Let's see. I guess I wanted to talk about this morning's panel, Liz Weintraub from Tuesdays with Liz. She brought up the letters after the panelists' names. And I think that this is another thing that we need to start rethinking is the value of these limited set of degrees and how we measure skills. And rather than have, you know, your high school diploma, your undergraduate degree, your graduate degree, your PhD, apologies to the people who have earned all of those things. I know you have worked hard. But I think we need to start making how we measure skills much more granular. And I think we also need to transform how we teach people to be much more granular as well, skills-based learning. I think that as a society, everything we do is much more complicated, and where I've seen success is when you have a group of people with expertise in a very small thing collaborating. We're not inventing electricity anymore, which is, you know, it was done and it spurred a whole bunch of inventions after that. It's like we're sending people well, we're sending rocket ships to Mars, and it takes a team of people with lots of different skills. And I just think, yeah, we need to start thinking about different ways of giving people credentials and measuring their skills that they've achieved.
So I had the pleasure of visiting a couple of CAST schools last month, and this seems to me to be up your alley with what you're doing with Universal Design for Learning. I mean, kids are learning different kinds of competencies as they go through their days.
Yeah, with some of the tools that we're designing and some of the techniques that we're trying out, we're really working on this collaboration process and ways in which we can help make access to for all students to collaborate, to interact, to work with one another, for the teacher to monitor that, see that, actually contribute to that as well within that. But at a bigger level, outside the classroom level, there's also that collaboration of teachers and the professional communities that they create to help set the stage in the school for all learners to learn, and the acceptance of all students in that setting, and the goal for students to become teams of innovators and learners. And that really does need to work around all of the components of what we have in Universal Design for Learning, of having an interest in it, being engaged, making sure that there are ways that we can take action and have expression about what it is that we're learning and doing, and then having access to all the things. The access is just that key component for sure. But building those skills and building those opportunities to be able to interact and work together, solve problems as a team, as professionals working with students, and as students learning to become professionals and get ready for the world.
Yeah, I think that there's another key that's been brought up. We seem to, I think the people that should become the experts in their own learning are the students themselves. Mm-hmm. And we've created systems where we don't, and especially individuals that really need to know about their own learning because it's so different and diverse, and there's not going to be a lifelong expert that's going to accompany them through the rest of their life knowing exactly what they need. We need to start at a really early age, encouraging students to learn about themselves, how they learn best, to become self-advocates, to determine what they like, what their goals are. And our systems at the moment don't allow for that. So I think, and accompanying that is allow them to determine what evidence they're going to give that they've learned the skills. So that gets to the micro-credentials and more granular ways of determining that you've learned something from life, from formal education, from your friend, from a hobby that you have. So I think we need to open up that opportunity as well.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think one thing I always use as a way to look for opportunities for innovation is when I look at a context or a situation or a system, you ask, why was this designed this way? And almost always, there's always a bias being designed from the perspective of management and administration, because that's where the dollars is usually coming from. And so it gets designed from that perspective. And if that's the answer, then usually it's not optimally designed for the learner. And so that's an opportunity to jump in and put yourselves in the situation of the learner and say, how would this be for the learner if there was just completely clean slate? And you often come up with something fairly different. One simple, powerful example was actually Mike Smith funded some work out of Open Learning Initiative in Carnegie Mellon, and they had a statistics course, and they built this online adaptive course as well, and they wanted to run a randomized control trial if the kids outside of, if they just took the online course, how would they do compared to the kids with the Carnegie Mellon professor. They did random assignment, but Mike was smart. He said, you know what, the only reason this semester is 16 weeks is for administrative purposes. Give them 8 weeks, half the time. Let's see what happens. They did it. The kids actually learned better, and they even retained 6 months later better. Yes. And so, you challenge these conceptions that we have that are just structures for systems management, and often you can come up with really interesting and powerful breakthroughs. And particularly towards flexibility. A lot of what we're talking about is flexibility.
I think you're making a really good point. Yeah.
So you mentioned Carnegie Mellon. The chairman of the Department of Design there for a long time was Richard Buchanan, who wrote a lot about the need for human rights in thinking about design. And I like to think about that a lot, about how people who work in technology are humanists. My degree is in the humanities, and I often see people say, well, you shouldn't study the humanities anymore, you should all be in STEM because we need more technology and more hard sciences. But see, I think it's all humanities. I think everything that you are doing, you're trying to develop tools that will be useful to mankind. And to me, if that's not the humanities, I don't know what is. Do you think about human rights when you're doing your work? Do you think about?
Completely, yeah. Actually, another thing I would say there is the humanities are the future. STEM is replicable, it's formulaic. Not all, but a lot of it is. And so if some of the predictions we have about where technology is going are going to come to fruition, then it's the humanities, the human judgment, the human sense of the soul, the more complex and fuzzy and not formulaic things that are going to be the critical things that we need to focus on, because the machines can take over some of the rest of it.
Thanks for
right?
saying fuzzy, by the way. Anybody else?
I mean, one thing I learned kind of in my career, my undergraduate was systems engineering, and my graduate work was in education, but I did a lot of design thinking work. So systems is very kind of top down. Design thinking is very sort of bottoms up. And one thing that really made it clear, the truly brilliant systems engineers I worked with, was that the more perspectives you can take and understand on a system, the better you can understand it. If you can understand it from a human design perspective, an engineering perspective, an economic perspective, an artistic perspective, the more you can understand it, then the more sophisticated you can be, and it's just far more powerful, and that's where I saw the true geniuses in the field, how they really operated. So I think it just gets to this, there are many ways to look at even the same problems, even technical problems, and it just brings power and innovation to any sort of approach that leads to success.
Thank you.
And the thing I'd just like to add on to that is that there isn't an answer, right? There isn't going back to what I said earlier about not one size fits all, there are many ways in which we can approach things. And because of variation in who we are as humans, we're going to, what's going to work for me may be very different from what works for you. But we can program that in, and we can have those technologies, we can have those supports or scaffolds or materials for us in the tools that we're creating. And we can approach it in a way that's going to work best for us to work together to create something that we need to do.
Last word goes to you, Mark, if you want it.
The clock of doom is telling us we're close.
I think I have enough time to pass it over to Jutta for the last word. Well, I think my undergraduate is in social work, and I only ended up in technology because I needed to pay back my student loans.
That's the economic perspective.
But I would like to think that I ended up in the field of accessibility because of some of the things I learned in my undergraduate liberal arts education. I also like to point out that I think online learning, digital learning, has the potential to expose learners to people outside of their own economic group, their own cultural group. I see statistics flying around all the time at work, and one of the things that I discovered the other day that shocked me was that only 24% of visitors to our site came from the United States. So I'm not, we have over 1,200 courses running, and I'm not tuned into everything that's going on in every course, but I can only imagine that there's an incredible diversity going on in the discussion forums, and that the learners are benefiting from that exposure to something they wouldn't be exposed to in the classroom, for instance.
Fantastic.
And human rights is critical to human survival.
Yep.
It is.
All of the risks that we have at the moment are based upon not thinking about the inclusion and of humanity within and equity of humanity.
It depends on how we define the problem. If the problem is how to get a kid from first grade to second grade, that's one thing. If we talk about equity and building an America that has a strong base across and that has decent standards of living for as many people as possible, and it is not designed only to provide benefit to the people in the very wealthiest categories. If that's what we're focusing on, then I think a different approach to technology is one that we will move forward with. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you my panel.